The veil of white was thick enough to blind, but not enough to muffle the sound of hooves pounding against frozen earth. Abigail Harper ran through the Montana forest, her breath forming desperate clouds in the winter dawn. The wedding dress that had once been pristine white was now torn and muddied, snagging on every branch as if the forest itself conspired to slow her escape. Behind her, male voices echoed between the pines. She couldn't have gone far. The familiar voice of her father, Sherman Harper, thundered through the trees. Find her! Abigail's ankle throbbed where she had twisted it in a rabbit hole. Each step painted the snow with small crimson footprints. The cold had long since numbed her feet, but not her resolve. The trees thinned suddenly. Abigail skidded to a halt at the edge of a steep ravine, the drop obscured by swirling mist. The sound of rushing water rose from somewhere far below. She turned, looking back the way she had come. The voices grew louder. Horses' snorts punctuated the still morning air. She stood at the precipice, one foot in emptiness, the other in a life she could no longer endure. The choice seemed simple, yet impossible. Her father's figure emerged from the tree line on horseback, his face contorted with a rage she knew too well. Nowhere to run now, girl, he snarled, dismounting. You've humiliated this family for the last time. Abigail looked down at the ravine, then back at her father. She closed her eyes and chose. 2 weeks earlier, rain mixed with sleet pelted the wooden steps of Oak Ridge's only church. Abigail Harper stood frozen halfway up, her satin wedding dress already soaked through. 2 sizes too small, it compressed her ribs until each breath was a conscious effort. Sherman Harper's fingers dug into her arm with enough force to leave fresh bruises atop fading ones. You'll marry him, he growled into her ear, or this family dies with you. The gathered townsfolk huddled under umbrellas and hats, their faces a mixture of morbid curiosity and judgment. Oak Ridge had thrived during the Silver Rush, transforming from a simple lumber camp to a town of opportunity. For some. For Sherman Harper, it meant wealth and influence. For his daughter, it meant being bartered like cattle. Hurry up, Harper, someone called from the crowd. Pierce doesn't like to be kept waiting, especially not for damaged goods. Laughter erupted, drunk and cruel. These were faces Abigail had known all her life. The shopkeeper who had once slipped her candy as a child, the school teacher who had praised her reading. Now they watched her public humiliation with the detached interest of theatergoers. At the top of the steps stood Pierce Montgomery, his silver-streaked hair slicked back beneath an expensive hat, his tailored suit marking him as a man of means. At 55, he was more than twice Abigail's age. His eyes traveled over her body like he was assessing a mare at auction. For God's sake, get her inside before she drowns, Pierce barked to no one in particular. White doesn't suit her anyway. More laughter. Abigail's cheeks burned despite the cold. Her gaze dropped to her muddied shoes. The preacher, Reverend Collins, stood uncomfortably to the side, Bible clutched to his chest like a shield. He wouldn't meet her eyes. No one would. As Sherman pushed her toward the church door, a sound cut through the rainfall. Boots on stone, slow, heavy, deliberate. The crowd parted instinctively as a tall figure emerged from the mist. The man stood a head taller than most, shoulders broad beneath a worn leather duster. His face was weathered, jawline covered with a neatly trimmed beard peppered with gray. Under the shadow of his hat, his eyes were clear and piercing, taking in the scene with calm assessment. She's not marrying that man, he said, his voice quiet yet carrying across the churchyard like distant thunder. Silence fell, broken only by the persistent drumming of rain on umbrellas. Sherman turned, his face darkening. Who the hell do you think you are? The stranger lifted his head slightly, allowing the brim of his hat to rise. Dr. Ethan Redwood. His gaze shifted to Abigail, softening almost imperceptibly. And she's my wife. Murmurs erupted through the crowd. Abigail's breath caught in her throat. Dr. Redwood, the name stirred something in her memory, some half-remembered conversation from childhood. You damn well ain't, Sherman snarled, stepping forward. This is my daughter, and she's promised to Mr. Montgomery. I paid the preacher yesterday, Ethan said calmly, extracting a folded parchment from inside his coat. I have the papers. She signed them. He handed the document to the stunned preacher, who unfolded it with trembling fingers. Abigail caught a glimpse of what appeared to be her signature, a perfect forgery. Pierce Montgomery descended the steps, his face a mask of controlled fury. I don't know what game you're playing, Redwood, but this woman is promised to me. I've paid good money for her. Ethan's gaze never wavered. A woman isn't property to be bought or sold, Mr. Montgomery. Then he looked directly at Abigail, not through her, but at her. His voice softened, just enough for her to hear. With a word, and I'll take you away from here. You don't owe them anything. Abigail's heart hammered against her ribs. Was this another trap? Another man claiming ownership? But something in Ethan's steady gaze offered what she had never seen before. Choice. With a courage she didn't know she possessed, Abigail took one small step toward Ethan. Sherman's hand shot out, clamping around her wrist. Don't you dare, he hissed. Faster than seemed possible for a man his size, Ethan moved forward. His hand closed over Sherman's, not violent, but immovable, and peeled her father's fingers away as if removing bark from rotted wood. She's coming with me now, Ethan said, his voice carrying a finality that silenced even Sherman Harper. Any man who follows will answer to me. He extended his arm toward her, palm up, not grasping, not presuming, simply offering support should she choose to take it. With one final look at the life she was leaving, her father's rage, Pierce's cold calculation, the town's judgment, Abigail placed her trembling hand in the crook of Ethan's elbow. Together they walked through the parted crowd toward a waiting wagon with a sturdy bay horse. No one moved to stop them. No one spoke. Only when Ethan had helped her climb into the wagon did Sherman find his voice again. This isn't over, girl, he shouted. You'll come crawling back when you see what you've thrown away. Ethan took his place on the wagon seat, leaving enough space between them that their shoulders wouldn't accidentally brush even over the roughest terrain. He didn't acknowledge Sherman's threat, simply clicked his tongue to set the horse in motion. As they pulled away, rain washing over them in sheets, Abigail realized she was holding her breath. She released it slowly, feeling something unclench inside her chest. Not freedom, not yet, but the first taste of its possibility. They rode in silence as the town of Oak Ridge receded behind them. The road narrowed into a forest path, winding between towering pines. Snow began to fall, large flakes melting as they touched Abigail's skin. Her wedding dress clung to her like a shroud, the too tight bodice restricting her breathing. Ethan kept his gaze forward, hands steady on the reins. Occasionally he would glance over his shoulder, scanning the path behind them. Each time, Abigail's heart would skip, expecting to see her father's men in pursuit. They won't follow immediately, Ethan said, seeming to read her thoughts. Not in this weather, but they will come eventually. His voice was deep but gentle, like water running over smooth stones. Abigail studied him from the corner of her eye. Dr. Ethan Redwood, the mountain physician some townsfolk whispered about, the man who lost his family and retreated to the wilderness. Some claimed he was touched by grief, others that he possessed unusual healing knowledge. The question escaped Abigail's lips before she could contain it. Why would you help me? Ethan was quiet for so long, she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his words carried the weight of careful selection. Because no one should be forced to marry against their will. It wasn't the full truth, Abigail could sense that much, but it wasn't a lie either. She drew the threadbare blanket closer around her shoulders against the biting wind, appreciating how he adjusted his posture to ensure their bodies remained separate entities despite the wagon's narrow confines. The path steepened as they climbed higher into the mountains. Pine gave way to stands of aspen, their skeletal winter branches creating a lacework against the graying sky. With each mile, Abigail felt the grip of Oak Ridge loosening, but uncertainty tightened in its place. She was traveling into the wilderness with a stranger, a man who claimed to be her husband. Had she escaped one cage only to enter another? As if sensing her unease, Ethan spoke again. We'll reach my cabin before nightfall. You'll be safe there. From your father, from Montgomery, from anyone who wishes you harm. And from you? Abigail asked, finding a courage in desperation. Ethan turned to her then, his eyes clear and direct. Especially from me. Something in his steady gaze made her believe him, at least for now. The snow fell thicker as the afternoon waned. Abigail's teeth began to chatter, the wet wedding dress offering no protection against the mountain cold. Without comment, Ethan removed his coat and offered it to her, still keeping his distance. "I won't freeze," he said simply when she hesitated. "You might." Abigail accepted the coat, wrapping it around her shoulders. It carried his scent, pine needles, wood smoke, and something medicinal. She noticed a small blood stain on one sleeve, old and faded, the evidence of his profession. As twilight approached, the trees opened to reveal a small clearing. Nestled between two large aspens stood a cabin, sturdy and well-maintained. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, and lamplight glowed in a single window. "We're here," Ethan said, guiding the horse to a stop. He climbed down first, then stepped back, giving Abigail space to descend on her own. She hesitated, looking at the cabin that might be her prison or her sanctuary. "You have a choice, Abigail," Ethan said quietly. "You can come inside, get warm, and we'll talk. Or I can take you somewhere else, another town perhaps. But I don't recommend traveling further tonight." The use of her name startled her. It sounded different in his voice, not a possession or a disappointment, just a name. Her name. Abigail climbed down from the wagon, her legs stiff with cold. Her ankle twisted slightly as she landed, sending a jolt of pain up her leg. She stumbled, and Ethan moved as if to catch her, but stopped himself, allowing her to regain her balance independently. "Thank you," she said, the words unfamiliar on her tongue. When had she last been allowed to accept or decline help? Ethan nodded once, then led the way to the cabin door. He opened it but didn't usher her inside, simply waiting for her to enter of her own accord. The interior was warmer than Abigail had expected. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting dancing light across simple but well-crafted furniture. The cabin revealed two distinct lives merged into one space: the practical domesticity of living quarters, with a table, chairs, and cooking area, alongside the intellectual curiosity of a physician's workplace. Glass bottles caught the firelight, their contents ranging from dried leaves to mysterious tinctures, while leather-bound volumes lined shelves built into the log walls. Abigail stood near the fire, arms wrapped around herself, absorbing both warmth and information. This place spoke volumes about its occupant: ordered but not rigid, functional yet somehow inviting. Ethan hung his hat by the door, then busied himself with the kettle, allowing her time to process her new surroundings without scrutiny. "You should change out of those wet clothes," he said, his back to her as he filled a kettle. "There are dry things in the chest beside the bed. I'll step outside while you do." He placed the kettle on the hook above the fire, then moved toward the door without waiting for her response. His hand was on the latch when he paused, adding almost as an afterthought, "The marriage certificate isn't real. I needed a way to get you out of there that they couldn't legally challenge. I apologize for the deception." The door closed behind him before Abigail could respond. She stood frozen for a moment, processing his words. The marriage wasn't real. She wasn't bound to him. It had been a ruse, a clever one, to extract her from her father's grasp. Moving to the wooden chest, she found neatly folded clothing, simple, practical items: a flannel shirt, woolen skirts, undergarments that looked barely worn. She changed quickly, grateful to be free of the constricting wedding dress. The clothes were slightly large but clean and warm. A soft knock at the door preceded Ethan's voice. "May I come in?" The request for permission startled her. "Yes," she called, smoothing the borrowed skirt. Ethan entered, snow dusting his shoulders. He removed his boots at the door, then retrieved the now boiling kettle from the fire. With practiced movements, steam rose from the two cups as he set hers on the table's edge before withdrawing to his side, allowing her to retrieve it without their fingers risking contact. "It's willow bark," he explained. "For pain, I noticed you're favoring your right ankle." Abigail accepted the cup, surprised he had observed her injury. "Thank you." Ethan gestured to a chair. "Please sit. We should talk." Abigail perched on the edge of the chair, holding the warm cup between her palms. Ethan took the seat across from her, the table between them like a neutral territory. "Abigail," he began, then stopped himself. "Miss Harper, I want to be clear about my intentions. You're safe here. I won't harm you. I won't touch you without your consent. Tomorrow, if you wish to leave, I'll take you wherever you want to go." His directness was disarming. Abigail had lived in a world of insinuation and veiled threats, where men's intentions were rarely stated but always felt. This plain speaking left her momentarily speechless. Why, she asked again, needing more than his earlier partial answer. Why would you risk my father's anger? Why would you care what happens to me? Ethan's eyes met hers, then drifted to the fire. I've seen what happens when women are treated as property. I've failed to help in the past. I won't fail again if I can prevent it. There was history in those words, pain carefully contained. Abigail sensed it was all he would say on the matter for now. What will happen when my father comes looking? She asked, the practical question calming her racing thoughts. This cabin is known to few. Those who do know of it are people I've helped, people with no love for men like Sherman Harper or Pierce Montgomery. Ethan sipped his tea. We have time to consider your options, to make a plan. A plan, Abigail repeated, the concept foreign and alluring. When had she last been allowed to plan anything about her own life? For now, you should rest, Ethan said, rising. Take the bed. I'll sleep here by the fire. Abigail's brow furrowed. I can't take your bed. You can and you will, Ethan said, his tone gentle but firm. You're injured and exhausted. I'm accustomed to sleeping rough. He moved to a cedar trunk tucked beneath the window, retrieving extra blankets that carried the faint scent of dried lavender. His actions revealed the physician's precision, economical yet unhurried, each gesture purposeful. Watching him prepare the makeshift bed, Abigail recognized something she'd never before encountered from a man, an awareness of how his very presence might affect her, in a deliberate effort to minimize any sense of threat. It wasn't just politeness, it was a fundamental recognition of her autonomy that struck deeper than words of reassurance ever could. When had anyone ever considered her comfort, her sense of security? Thank you, she said again, the words still unfamiliar. Ethan nodded once, then turned to bank the fire for the night. Sleep well, Miss Harper. Abigail woke with a start, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar ceiling above her. The events of the day rushed back, the aborted wedding, the escape with Dr. Redwood, the cabin in the wilderness. She sat up slowly, the borrowed nightshirt soft against her skin. Moonlight streamed through the window, casting the cabin in silver and shadow. The fire had burned low, embers glowing red in the hearth. Ethan sat in a chair nearby, his back to her, silhouetted against the faint light. He held something in his hands, a photograph, Abigail realized. His thumb traced the edge with a gentleness she could feel across the room. Then so quietly she almost missed it, he spoke. I kept my promise, Eleanor. Your daughter is safe. Abigail's breath caught in her throat. Eleanor, her mother's name. A name rarely spoken in the Harper household since her death 8 years ago. How did Ethan know her mother? What promise had he made? She watched as Ethan reached into his pocket and removed something that caught the moonlight, a silver pendant on a delicate chain. He held it to the photo, as if showing it to the person captured there. I'll make sure she stays safe, he whispered. I won't fail this time. Abigail remained perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe. The pendant was unmistakable, her mother's heart-shaped locket, the one Sherman claimed had been buried with her. Abigail had mourned its loss almost as much as she'd mourned her mother. As Ethan carefully returned the photo and locket to his pocket, he rolled up his sleeve to check a bandage on his forearm. The movement revealed something else, a long, jagged scar running the length of his inner wrist. Even in the dim light, Abigail recognized the mark of a wound self-inflicted. This man had secrets, depths of pain she could only guess at. And somehow, inexplicably, those secrets were entwined with her mother. Abigail eased back down onto the pillow, mind racing. She had fled one mystery into the arms of another. But unlike her father's household, where questions were met with the back of a hand, this mystery offered something new, the possibility of answers. She closed her eyes but didn't sleep, listening to the quiet sounds of Ethan settling back into his makeshift bed, the occasional pop from the dying fire, the whisper of wind through aspen branches outside. For the first time in years, the silence around her didn't feel threatening. Morning arrived with fresh snowfall and pale sunlight. Abigail woke to find the cabin empty, a note propped against a cup on the table. Checking traps, breakfast on the stove, back soon. E. The simplicity of the message, the lack of commands or expectations, felt foreign. Abigail rose and dressed in the borrowed clothes, noticing how different her body felt without the constriction of fashionable corsets and layers. She moved to the small mirror hanging near the medical shelves, barely recognizing the woman who looked back. Her dark hair hung loose around her shoulders, free from the severe styling her father preferred. Her face, always too round for current fashion, seemed softer without the constant tension she usually carried. The bruise on her cheek from her father's last correction was fading to a sickly yellow. Breakfast was simple but plentiful. Cornbread, beans, and strong coffee kept warm on the back of the stove. Abigail ate slowly, savoring the novelty of a meal without criticism of her appetite. After washing her dishes, a small act of independence, she ventured outside to explore the surroundings. The garden behind the cabin captured her attention despite its winter dormancy. Through the snow, she could make out deliberate patterns to the plantings, not just decorative but organized by medicinal purpose. She recognized sections for fever reducers, wound healers, and pain relievers, reminding her of illustrations in the forbidden books she'd cherished at home. Here in the open air, her mother's whispered lessons about healing plants seemed less like dangerous secrets and more like valuable knowledge finally finding purpose. The door at the rear of the cabin opened onto a snow-covered garden. Despite the winter dormancy, Abigail could make out organized beds where herbs would grow in warmer seasons. Carefully tended paths wound between them, now barely visible under the snow. She stepped outside, her borrowed boots crunching on the fresh powder. The cold air filled her lungs, sharp and clean. Mountains rose on all sides, their peaks disappearing into low clouds. The isolation that might have frightened her yesterday now felt like protection. Movement at the edge of the garden caught her eye. Stepping closer, she discovered a small plot set apart from the rest, marked by two simple wooden crosses. The first, smaller one, bore the name Rose Redwood, age 8. The second simply read Victoria Redwood. No dates, no epitaphs, just names preserved against forgetting. Ethan's family, the wife and daughter he had lost. Abigail stood silent before the markers, understanding now another layer of the pain she'd glimpsed in his eyes. Like her, he carried ghosts. Unlike her, he seemed to have found a way to live alongside them, rather than being haunted by them. The sound of approaching footsteps in snow drew her attention. Ethan appeared around the side of the cabin, carrying a string of rabbits. He paused when he saw her by the graves, something vulnerable flickering across his face before the calm returned. "I see you found my garden," he said, his voice carefully neutral. Abigail nodded, gesturing to the crosses. "I'm sorry for your loss." A simple phrase inadequate for the magnitude it attempted to encompass. Yet Ethan seemed to recognize the sincerity behind it. "Thank you," he replied. Then after a moment, "They died 6 years ago. Victoria first, then Rose 3 months later. Influenza." The short sentences carried oceans of unspoken grief. Abigail didn't press for more, recognizing the cost of even this small sharing. "The garden is beautiful, even in winter," she said, changing the subject. "You grow medicinal herbs?" Something in Ethan's posture eased slightly. "Yes, many plants that modern medicine overlooks still have value." "I recognize some of them," Abigail ventured. "From books, echinacea there and valerian, foxglove in that corner, though that needs careful handling." Ethan's eyebrows rose slightly. "You know herbs?" Abigail ducked her head, an old habit when drawing attention to her intelligence. "My mother taught me when I was young. After she died, I read whatever I could find. My father discouraged it." "Knowledge should never be discouraged," Ethan said, the first hint of anger coloring his tone. It wasn't directed at her, she realized, but at the limitation imposed on her mind. He gestured toward the cabin. "Come inside. I need to prepare these rabbits, and it's too cold to stand about." Back in the warmth of the cabin, Ethan worked efficiently to dress the rabbits, while Abigail found herself drawn again to his medical shelves. She ran her fingers lightly over the spines of books, titles whispering promises of knowledge. Gray's Anatomy, Materia Medica, Botanical Medicine of the Mountain West. "You may read any of them," Ethan said without looking up from his work. "Knowledge freely given is the only kind worth having." Abigail carefully selected a volume on herbal remedies, half expecting to be stopped, corrected. When no reprimand came, she settled into a chair by the fire and opened the book with reverent hands. They passed the morning in companionable silence. Ethan preparing the rabbits for stewing, Abigail absorbed in the book. Occasionally she would ask a question about a particular plant or preparation, and Ethan would answer concisely but thoroughly, his respect for her intelligence evident in his refusal to simplify. It was the most peaceful morning Abigail could remember. As Ethan placed the rabbit stew over the fire to cook, he finally asked the question that had hovered unspoken since her discovery in the garden. "Why did you come with me yesterday? You had no reason to trust me." Abigail closed the book, considering her answer carefully. "I had no reason to trust anyone at that church," she said finally. "But you offered me a choice. No one had done that before." Ethan nodded, accepting her answer without pressing further. He stirred the stew, adding dried herbs from one of his jars. The scent of rosemary and thyme filled the cabin. "May I ask you something?" Abigail ventured, gathering courage. "You may ask anything," Ethan replied. "I may not always answer, but you may always ask." "Last night," she began, watching his back stiffen slightly, "I heard you mention my mother's name. You were holding her locket. How did you know Eleanor Harper?" The silence that followed was heavy with consideration. Ethan continued stirring the stew, his movements deliberate. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but clear. "I was the physician who attended your mother in her final days." Not the complete truth, Abigail was certain of that, but again, not a lie. "My father said she died of fever," Abigail said. "Is that true?" Ethan turned to face her, his expression grave. "What do you believe happened to your mother, Abigail?" The use of her first name, the directness of his gain, created an intimacy that made evasion impossible. Abigail swallowed hard. "I believe she died by her own hand," she whispered, giving voice to the suspicion she'd harbored for years. "I found her journal, hidden in the lining of her sewing basket. She wrote of despair, of seeing no way forward." Ethan's eyes held hers, neither confirming nor denying. "And if that were true, if she made that choice, would you think less of her?" "No," Abigail answered without hesitation. "I would understand. My father—" She faltered, then continued, "My father broke something in her long before she died." Ethan nodded once, accepting her words as truth. "Your mother was a remarkable woman," he said. "She deserved better than the life given to her." "Why do you have her locket?" Abigail asked, pressing forward now that the door had been opened. "She gave it to me," Ethan said simply, "for safekeeping." Another partial truth. Abigail sensed there was more, much more, but also recognized she had reached the limit of what Ethan would share today. The rest would have to wait. They ate lunch together, the stew rich and satisfying. Conversation shifted to safer topics, the properties of various herbs, the changing weather, the best techniques for setting simple fractures. Ethan spoke more freely about medicine than about himself, his knowledge extensive and his teaching style respectful. By late afternoon, snow began falling again, thick flakes drifting past the windows. Ethan built up the fire while Abigail washed the dishes, the domestic routine strangely comforting in its normalcy. As darkness fell, they sat by the fire, each with a book in hand. Abigail found herself stealing glances at her unlikely rescuer, trying to reconcile the gentle teacher with the man determined enough to confront Sherman Harper and Pierce Montgomery. Both were genuine aspects of him, she realized. The healer and the protector, roles he seemed to carry with equal seriousness. The fire popped and hissed, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, wind whispered through the aspen trees, their bare branches creaking like old conversations. For the first time in memory, Abigail felt the tension in her shoulders begin to unwind. She had no illusions that this peace would last. Her father was not a man to accept defiance. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions. But for tonight, in this cabin with its shelves of knowledge and its keeper of secrets, Abigail Harper allowed herself to simply exist without fear. As the fire burned lower, her eyes grew heavy. The book slipped from her fingers as sleep overtook her. Through half-closed eyes, she watched Ethan rise quietly and retrieve a blanket. He placed the blanket within her reach rather than directly upon her shoulders, a silent acknowledgement of her right to accept or refuse even this small comfort. Only after she nodded did he gently settle it around her before retreating to his chair across the room. The simple act of consideration, expecting nothing in return, was more foreign to Abigail than the wilderness outside. As she drifted into sleep, she wondered what other discoveries awaited her in this new territory, both around and within her. A week passed in the mountain cabin, marked by snowfall and gradual thaw. Abigail's life settled into rhythms unlike any she had known. Mornings spent learning from Ethan's medical texts, afternoons assisting with his preparations of tinctures and salves, evenings by the fire in companionable silence. No harsh words, no expectations beyond mutual respect. She slept in the bed while Ethan maintained his place near the hearth, the arrangement unquestioned. On the eighth day, their quiet routine shattered with a pounding at the door. Abigail froze, the mortar and pestle she'd been using to grind dried echinacea suspended mid-motion. Ethan rose from where he'd been inventorying supplies, his movement fluid but cautious. "Stay back," he murmured, reaching for the rifle mounted above the door. The pounding came again, more urgent. "Doc," a man's voice called. "Doc Redwood, open up for God's sake." Ethan's posture relaxed slightly, though his caution remained. He unbolted the door, opening it just enough to see outside. A burly man stood on the threshold, supporting another whose leg was wrapped in a makeshift, blood-soaked bandage. Both wore the heavy flannel and canvas of lumbermen. "Maxwell," Ethan greeted the larger man. "What happened?" "Logging accident," Maxwell grunted. Johnson's axe slipped, cut deep into his thigh. Couldn't stop the bleeding proper. Ethan stepped back, pulling the door wide. "Bring him in." On the table. The wounded man groaned as Maxwell half-carried him inside. He left a trail of crimson droplets on the wooden floor. When he spotted Abigail, surprise flickered across his pain-contorted face. "You got a woman here, Doc?" "She's my assistant," Ethan replied without hesitation, already clearing the table. "And you're fortunate she is. We need to work quickly." Abigail stood motionless, uncertain of her role in this emergency. Ethan glanced at her, his eyes conveying confidence she didn't feel. "Water, clean cloths, the suture kit," he instructed calmly, "and the yarrow tincture from the third shelf." The clear directives broke her hesitation. Abigail moved with purpose, gathering the items while Ethan cut away the blood-soaked pant leg to reveal a gaping wound. "Missed the artery, thank God," Ethan muttered, examining the injury. "But it's deep. Johnson, I need to clean and stitch this. It's going to hurt." The wounded man nodded grimly. "Do what you must, Doc." Maxwell produced a flask from his coat. "Whiskey?" "For him, not for me," Ethan clarified. "Abigail, prepare the yarrow while I clean the wound." Abigail's hands trembled slightly as she measured the tincture into a cup, adding the precise amount of water Ethan had taught her. The yarrow would help slow the bleeding and prevent infection, if applied correctly. "I ain't letting no woman touch my wound," Johnson protested weakly as Abigail approached with the mixture. "Then suffer more pain than necessary," Ethan replied matter-of-factly, threading a curved needle. "Yarrow will numb the area and help with healing. Your choice." Johnson's eyes darted between Ethan's steady hands and Abigail's carefully prepared medicine. Pain won over prejudice. "Fine," he conceded. Abigail stepped forward, applying the tincture to the edges of the wound with a steady hand that belied her inner uncertainty. The sharp herbal scent rose between them. "Good," Ethan murmured, his voice reassuring. "Now I need you to hold the wound closed while I suture." Maxwell watched with poorly concealed surprise as Abigail positioned herself opposite Ethan, her fingers pressing the ragged flesh together exactly as needed. The intimacy of the act, blood, pain, healing, created a bridge between teacher and student that transcended their brief acquaintance. Ethan worked methodically, his stitches small and even. When Johnson's face contorted in pain, Abigail instinctively spoke. "Breathe through your nose, out through your mouth," she instructed, her voice finding a tone of gentle authority she hadn't known she possessed. "Focus on the sound of the wind in the aspens outside." Johnson obeyed, his breathing steadying. Maxwell raised an eyebrow, reassessing the woman before him. When the final stitch was placed, Ethan nodded approvingly at Abigail. "Now the comfrey salve and clean bandages." They worked in tandem, Ethan holding the leg steady while Abigail applied the salve and wrapped clean linen bandages around the thigh. No words were necessary, each anticipated the other's movements as if they'd worked together for years rather than days. "You're fortunate," Ethan told Johnson when they finished. "The wound is clean, no sign of poisoning, but you'll need to stay off it for at least a week, and the bandages must be changed daily." Maxwell frowned. "Can't keep him at the logging camp. Boss won't stand for idle men. He can stay here, Ethan said. I'll check the wound regularly. Mighty generous, Doc, Maxwell said, his tone suggesting this wasn't the first time Ethan had extended such kindness. His gaze shifted to Abigail. Didn't know you took on an assistant. Recent arrangement, Ethan replied, offering no further explanation. Maxwell nodded slowly, his eyes calculating. Heard about a wedding that didn't happen down in Oak Ridge. Sherman Harper's daughter, wasn't it? Ran off with some mountain man. The air in the cabin seemed to still. Abigail focused on cleaning the suture instruments, her back to the conversation, but her ears straining for Ethan's response. I don't concern myself with town gossip, Ethan said evenly. Johnson needs rest now. You're welcome to stay the night as well, Maxwell. Weather's turning. The deliberate change of subject wasn't lost on Maxwell, but he accepted it with a shrug. Appreciate it, Doc. Been meaning to have you look at this shoulder anyway. As Ethan helped Johnson to a pallet near the fire, Maxwell approached Abigail, speaking low. Don't know what brought you here, Miss Harper, but the doc's a good man. Best I've known. His weathered face softened slightly. Saved my arm when others would have taken it. Wouldn't take payment neither. Abigail looked up, startled by his use of her name and the unexpected confidence. You knew who I was. Maxwell nodded. Hard to mistake Sherman Harper's daughter, even in men's clothes. But don't worry, ain't my business who the doc takes in. He rubbed his shoulder absently. Just know there's plenty in these mountains who owe Ethan Redwood. We pay our debts when called. He rejoined Ethan then, discussing his shoulder ailment as if the exchange with Abigail hadn't occurred. But something had shifted. Abigail realized she and Ethan weren't as isolated as she'd thought. There were allies in these woods, people whose loyalty to the healer might extend to his assistant as well. That night, after their guests had settled, Ethan found Abigail at the window, watching snow swirl in the moonlight. You did well today, he said quietly. Your hands were steady when they needed to be. I was terrified, Abigail admitted, but it felt right, helping. Ethan studied her profile in the silvery light. You have a natural gift for medicine. Your mother would be proud. The mention of Eleanor hung between them, another thread in the unspoken tapestry of their connection. Maxwell knows who I am, Abigail said after a moment. Others might too. Ethan nodded. Yes, news travels, even in wilderness. He hesitated. We should discuss what happens next. Your father won't give up easily. No, he won't. Abigail turned from the window to face him directly. He sees me as property, more so now that I've defied him publicly. You have options, Ethan said. We could arrange passage east. I have colleagues in Boston who... I don't want to run forever, Abigail interrupted, the firmness in her voice surprising them both. This past week, working with herbs, learning medicine, it's the first time I've felt I might have purpose beyond being someone's wife. Something like pride flickered in Ethan's eyes. Then stay. Learn. We'll deal with Sherman Harper when we must. The simplicity of his acceptance, the absence of argument or persuasion, struck Abigail deeply. Another choice freely offered. Another decision respected. Thank you, she said, the phrase becoming easier with each utterance. They stood together at the window, watching winter's dance outside, the distance between them both proper and intimate. Two people who had known darkness finding unexpected light in shared purpose. The following day, with Johnson resting comfortably and Maxwell departed with herbs for his shoulder, Abigail found herself alone in the cabin while Ethan checked his trap lines. The solitude was a novel luxury after years of constant supervision. She found herself drawn to his workbench where a mortar and pestle sat beside bundles of dried plants. Her fingers traced the stone rim, remembering her mother's similar tools hidden beneath floorboards at home. Without conscious decision, she began sorting the harvested echinacea by stem and flower, applying knowledge gleaned from forbidden readings. The familiar rhythms of preparation calmed her racing thoughts, transforming nervous energy into productive focus. For the first time since leaving Oak Ridge, she felt not just safe but useful. When she knelt to retrieve a fallen pestle, her hand brushed against a floorboard that shifted slightly. Curious, Abigail pressed the board, feeling it give. She hesitated, conscience warring with curiosity. This was Ethan's private space. She had no right to pry. Yet the mystery of his connection to her mother burned within her. Slowly, she lifted the loose board, revealing a small compartment beneath. Inside lay a wooden box, simple but finely crafted, secured with a small brass lock. Abigail sat back on her heels, conflicted. She had promised herself never to become the kind of person her father was, one who violated others' privacy, who took what wasn't freely given. But if this box contained answers about her mother... After several minutes of internal debate, Abigail replaced the board and continued her chores. But her eyes kept returning to that spot on the floor, the knowledge of what lay beneath a persistent whisper. That night, as snow fell heavily outside, Ethan was called away to attend a difficult birth at a homestead 2 miles distant. "I might be gone until morning," he told Abigail as he packed his medical bag. "Johnson is sleeping soundly. Check his bandage once before you retire. If the wound shows any redness or unusual warmth, there's willow bark tea for fever." Abigail nodded, accepting the responsibilities with a mixture of nervousness and pride. "I'll tend to him properly." Ethan paused at the door, snowflakes already gathering on his hat brim. "I know you will." The simple confidence in his voice warmed her more than the fire. After he departed, Abigail checked on Johnson, changed his bandage, and prepared herself a simple supper. The cabin felt different with Ethan absent, emptier yet somehow more inviting to exploration. Her gaze returned to the loose floorboard. Johnson's deep, laudanum-assisted snores assured her of his oblivion. Moving quietly nonetheless, Abigail knelt and removed the board once more. The box sat exactly as she had left it, its brass lock gleaming dully in the firelight. She lifted it carefully, turning it in her hands. Not heavy, but solid. Where would Ethan keep a key? She considered the obvious places: his medical bag, gone with him; his clothing trunk, too obvious. Her eyes fell on the bookshelf. The answer came in a flash of intuition. The least conspicuous place to hide a key would be in the most conspicuous location, among his most treasured possessions. Abigail moved to the shelf where Ethan kept his oldest medical texts. Her fingers trailed along the spines until she found what she sought. Edinburgh Medical Compendium, 1854. Its leather binding more worn than the others, its position central on the shelf. She carefully removed it, letting the book fall open naturally. There, nestled in a small hollow cut into the pages, lay a brass key. Her heart pounded as she returned to the box. This was her last chance to respect Ethan's privacy, to wait for him to share his secrets willingly. But the weight of years without answers pressed upon her. The key turned smoothly in the lock. Inside the box lay several items: a bundle of letters tied with faded ribbon, a daguerreotype photograph in a small frame, and beneath them a leather-bound journal. Abigail lifted the photograph first, tilting it toward the firelight. A young woman smiled back at her. Beautiful, dark-haired, with intelligent eyes that seemed to look beyond the camera. Beside her stood a much younger Ethan, his face unlined by time and grief, his arm around the woman's shoulders. At their feet sat a small girl, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, with her mother's smile and her father's serious eyes. Victoria and Rose Redwood, the family Ethan had lost. Abigail carefully returned the photograph to the box, then gently untied the ribbon from the letters. The topmost envelope bore her mother's handwriting. Elegant, precise script addressing Dr. Ethan Redwood at an address in Boston. The letter was dated 15 years earlier. With trembling fingers, Abigail unfolded the yellowed paper. "My dearest friend, I write with news that will surprise you. I am to marry Sherman Harper." Yes, the same Sherman who seemed so beneath your notice when you visited last summer. He has prospects in the Western Territories, and father believes the match advantageous for expanding the family's lumber interest. I know what you will say, that I deserve better, that my education and sensibilities will wither in such remote country. Perhaps they shall. But what options truly exist for a woman in our society? Even your example, brilliant physician though you are, has faced obstacles I cannot imagine simply because of your humble origins. I've made my choice, Ethan. Please try to understand it, if not approve. Your friendship has meant everything to me these past years. With deepest affection, Eleanor. Abigail's hands shook as she refolded the letter. Her mother and Ethan had been friends, close friends, before her marriage. This wasn't merely a doctor-patient relationship. This was something deeper. She selected another letter, dated 2 years later. Ethan, your letter found me eventually. Mail service to Oak Ridge is unreliable at best. I'm touched by your concern, but I assure you I am well. Sherman's business grows with the settlement, and we are comfortable. You ask about my botanical studies. I confess they've been largely abandoned, though I maintain a small garden for household medicines. A doctor has finally settled here, more butcher than physician, but he serves for emergencies. I have wonderful news. I've been blessed with a daughter, Abigail. She has my dark hair, and I fancy your curiosity about the natural world. Even at 1 year old, she seems fascinated by my herb garden. I think of our medical school debates often, how fiercely we argued the merits of traditional knowledge versus modern science. I find myself wishing for such intellectual stimulation now. Your friend always, Eleanor. Abigail blinked back tears. She'd never known her mother had botanical studies or friends who valued her mind. Sherman Harper had painted Eleanor as a delicate, somewhat simple woman who'd died from weakness. This Eleanor, educated, thoughtful, connected to the world beyond Oak Ridge, was a revelation. She reached for the journal, opening to a random page in the middle. April 12, 1871. V grows worse. The cough brings blood now. My knowledge feels so inadequate in the face of consumption's relentless progress. She doesn't complain, but I see the pain in her eyes, the fear for Rose. What kind of physician cannot save his own wife? Eleanor's latest letter disturbs me greatly. Between the lines, I read what she cannot say directly, that Sherman has become a harsh man, that isolation and ambition have twisted him. She mentions a bruise from a fall that took weeks to heal. I recognize the language of the trap from my work at the charity hospital. I've written suggesting she visit Boston with young Abigail, offering to pay their passage. I doubt Sherman will permit it, but I must try. I cannot help V. Perhaps I can still help E. Abigail closed the journal, a cold certainty settling in her stomach. Ethan had known, or at least suspected, her father's true nature years before her mother's death. He had tried to help from afar, constrained by distance and circumstance. She returned to the letters, finding one dated just 2 months before Eleanor's death. The handwriting was shaky, the ink blotched in places as if by fallen tears. My dear Ethan, I receive your letters in secret now. Sherman has forbidden all correspondence he does not read first. The man I married exists no more. Silver fever has consumed him, leaving a stranger who sees conspiracies and disrespect in every glance. I fear for Abigail most of all. She is bright, too bright for her father's comfort. He destroyed her herb collection last week, called it woman's foolishness. She cried for days. I recognize in her the same love of knowledge that bound us as friends, and I fear Sherman will crush it as he has tried to crush mine. If anything should happen to me, please find a way to help her. She deserves the education, the life that I surrendered. I've enclosed my locket, the only valuable I still control. Sell it if needed to assist her. I grow weary, Ethan. The bruises heal more slowly now. The laudanum helps me sleep, but I require more each night. Sometimes I think of your wife's choice and understand it better than I wish to. With what remains of my heart, Eleanor, a sob escaped Abigail's throat before she could contain it. The sound momentarily disturbed Johnson, who shifted on his pallet before settling back into drugged sleep. The final piece fell into place. Her mother had not died of fever. Like Victoria Redwood, Eleanor Harper had chosen to end her suffering, and Ethan had discovered her too late. Abigail gathered the letters with reverent care, returning them to their ribbon binding. As she placed them back in the box, her fingers brushed against something else, a folded document tucked into the journal's back cover. She hesitated, then withdrew it, unfolding a single sheet of heavy paper. Legal language met her eyes, a last will and testament. Her mother's will, not the one Sherman had presented to the town after her death, leaving everything to him as her husband, but a secret document witnessed by Ethan during his last visit. Eleanor had left her personal inheritance, shares in her family's lumber business, in a small silver claim from her grandfather, directly to Abigail, to be held in trust until her 25th birthday or marriage, whichever came later. A fortune independent of Sherman's control. Abigail's mind raced. Her 25th birthday was less than 2 months away. Did her father know about this will? Was this why he had been so desperate to marry her to Pierce Montgomery before that date? to ensure her assets would fall under her husband's legal control. A new understanding of her father's urgency crystallized. This wasn't merely about his pride or Pierce's desires. This was about money and control, the twin gods of Sherman Harper's existence. Carefully, Abigail returned everything to the box, locked it, and replaced it beneath the floorboard. The key went back to its hiding place in the book. Physical evidence of her exploration erased, but the knowledge gained could never be undone. She moved to the window, watching snow accumulate in the moonlight. Outside, aspen branches swayed in the winter wind, their movements resembling outstretched hands. Her mother's hands, perhaps, finally able to reach her. When Ethan returned near dawn, exhausted but satisfied after safely delivering a healthy baby boy, he found Abigail asleep in the chair by the fire, a medical text open in her lap. He covered her with a blanket, noticing the dried tear tracks on her cheeks, but asking no questions. Some discoveries, he knew, had to be made in solitude. 3 more days passed, Johnson's wound healing cleanly under their shared care. The lumberman's initial skepticism about Abigail had transformed to grudging respect as he observed her knowledge of herbs and steady hands changing his bandages. On the 4th morning, as wet snow fell in heavy clumps outside, another knock came at the cabin door. This one lighter, more urgent. Ethan opened it to reveal a woman in her early 30s, elegant despite her travel-worn appearance, clutching the hand of a small girl no more than 7 years old. Both were soaked through, the child shivering visibly. "Please," the woman said, her voice cultured but trembling. "Are you the doctor? We need help." Ethan ushered them inside immediately. "I'm Dr. Redwood. What's happened?" The woman's gaze darted nervously around the cabin, registering Johnson in the corner, Abigail by the hearth, before returning to Ethan. "My name is Sophia Winters. This is my daughter Lily. We've come from Silverton." She lowered her voice. "We're running from my husband." Abigail moved forward instinctively, kneeling before the shivering child. "You're freezing, little one. Let's get you warm." As she helped Lily out of her wet coat, Abigail noticed bruises on the woman's wrists, partially hidden by her sleeves. The familiar pattern of finger marks stirred memories of her own flesh similarly marked. "Your husband did that?" Abigail asked quietly as she wrapped a blanket around Lily. Sophia hesitated, then nodded. "Judge Winters is a respected man in Silverton. No one questions his authority, especially not over his family." "You're safe here," Abigail assured her, recognizing in Sophia's eyes the same desperate hope she herself had felt just days ago. Ethan had been observing the exchange with an unreadable expression. "How did you find this place?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral. "My cabin isn't on any maps." "A woman in Silverton," Sophia explained, accepting the tea Abigail offered. "She said there was a doctor in the mountains who helped people, women, who needed to disappear, that he wouldn't turn us away." Abigail saw something flicker in Ethan's eyes, concern, perhaps, or wariness, but he simply nodded. "You're welcome to stay until you decide your next steps. The child can take my bed. Mrs. Harper and I will then make arrangements." Sophia's gaze sharpened at the name. "Harper, any relation to Sherman Harper of Oak Ridge?" "His daughter," Abigail admitted, seeing no reason for deception with a fellow fugitive. "Former daughter, I suppose. I left rather abruptly." "The wedding," Sophia said, recognition dawning. "I heard whispers even in Silverton. They said you ran off with—" She glanced at Ethan, connecting pieces in her mind. "It's complicated," Abigail said, not wanting to explain the false marriage certificate. "Isn't it always?" Sophia replied with a sad smile. "Men like my husband, like your father, they create such complicated webs for us to escape." Throughout the day, as Lily napped and Johnson dozed, Sophia shared fragments of her story, her marriage at 18 to the much older judge, his gradual transformation from stern to cruel, the increasing isolation as he cut her off from family and friends. "When he started being harsh with Lily, I knew we had to leave," she concluded. "No inheritance, no position is worth my daughter's safety." Abigail nodded in understanding, but something about Sophia nagged at her. The way her gaze lingered on Ethan's medical supplies, her oddly specific questions about Abigail's escape from Oak Ridge. Perhaps it was simply the caution of one traumatized woman recognizing another's defenses. That evening, while Ethan checked Johnson's wound, Sophia sat beside Abigail at the fire, speaking low. May I ask how your mother died? The question startled Abigail. Why do you ask? Sophia's fingers twisted in her lap. My mother, she suffered similarly to me. She never escaped. I wondered if my mother took her own life, Abigail said quietly, the truth she'd confirmed through Ethan's letters easier to voice now. My father claimed it was fever, but I found her journal afterward. She saw no other way out. Sophia nodded slowly. I'm sorry. Was it difficult to discover? Yes and no, Abigail replied. Part of me always knew. Children sense more than adults realize. Lily has nightmares, Sophia whispered. She doesn't say why, but I know. She glanced across the room where Ethan was showing the little girl how to roll bandages. Dr. Redwood seems different from most men. He is, Abigail confirmed. He respects boundaries, offers choices instead of commands. A rare quality, Sophia observed. How did you come to trust him so quickly? Again, that subtle probing. Abigail chose her words carefully. He knew my mother years ago. She trusted him. That was enough to start. Sophia seemed about to ask more when Johnson called Ethan over, complaining of increased pain. The conversation shifted, but Abigail's wariness remained. Later that night, after everyone else had settled to sleep, Johnson on his pallet, Sophia and Lily in Ethan's bed, Abigail in a makeshift cot near the fire, Ethan motioned Abigail outside to the small covered porch. The snow had stopped, leaving the world crystalline under a three-quarter moon. Their breath formed clouds in the cold air as Ethan spoke low. Something isn't right with our guests. Abigail nodded, relieved he shared her concern. Her questions seem directed, as if she's seeking specific information. Indeed, Ethan's eyes scanned the tree line, a habit Abigail had noticed whenever he sensed potential danger. While you were preparing dinner, I checked her belongings. Abigail raised an eyebrow. An invasion of privacy, Doctor? A faint smile touched his lips at her gentle rebuke. Perhaps, but a necessary one. His expression grew serious again. She carries a photograph of your father, Abigail, and a sealed letter addressed to him. Cold that had nothing to do with the winter night seeped into Abigail's bones. You think she's working for him? But the bruises, the bruises could be real. Your father isn't above hurting his allies to maintain his fiction. The child, Ethan shook his head. Children can be excellent actors when properly motivated. Abigail leaned against the porch railing, processing this betrayal. What do we do? We wait, Ethan said. Watch. Learn what she truly wants before we reveal our suspicions. He hesitated. I should tell you, Maxwell brought news from town yesterday while you were gathering herbs. Your father has hired Pinkerton detectives to find you. Pinkertons? Abigail whispered, understanding the gravity. The famous detective agency was relentless. Their aide is skilled at infiltration and tracking. You think Sophia could be, possibly, Ethan conceded, or working with them. Either way, we must be cautious. He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small object that gleamed in the moonlight. I want you to have this. Abigail extended her hand, and Ethan placed her mother's silver locket in her palm. The heart-shaped pendant felt warm, as if it carried some essence of Eleanor still. It belongs to you now, Ethan said quietly. And there's something else. From his other pocket, he produced a folded document, her mother's true will. I believe you have already seen this. Heat rushed to Abigail's cheeks. You knew I looked in the box. The key was slightly out of alignment in the book, Ethan said, no accusation in his tone. You deserve those answers, Abigail. I should have shared them sooner. The lack of anger at her invasion of his privacy stunned her. I'm sorry for not asking. Some questions are too important to voice, Ethan replied. Keep these safe. If we're separated for any reason, the will proves your claim to your inheritance. The locket, he paused. The locket is simply yours by right. We won't be separated, Abigail said with more confidence than she felt. Ethan's eyes held hers in the moonlight. I hope not, but hope is a poor substitute for preparation. They stood silent for a moment, the night wrapping around them like a shared blanket. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, a lonely, haunting sound that seemed to carry all the wilderness's secrets. We should move you and Sophia to my other cabin tomorrow. Ethan decided. It's deeper in the mountains, more difficult to find. I've used it before as a safe haven. For other women, Abigail guessed, pieces of Ethan's past coming together in her mind. You've helped others escape, haven't you? That's how Sophia knew to find you. Ethan nodded once. After Victoria, after Eleanor, I couldn't save them, but perhaps I could save others. In that moment, Abigail understood the depth of his mission. Not merely a doctor healing bodies, but a man trying to mend his own soul through saving those he could still reach. What will you do? She asked. Create a diversion. Make it appear we've gone towards Silverton if anyone is watching. Ethan's gaze returned to the tree line. Maxwell will help. He knows these mountains as well as I do. Abigail's hand closed around the locket and will. I should keep studying my mother at herbs, she said, the non sequitur making Ethan turn to her with questioning eyes. If we're to help women like Sophia, like my mother, they'll need healing for more than just their visible wounds. Something shifted in Ethan's expression, surprise followed by a warm recognition, not of her physical resemblance to Eleanor, but of her spirit. Yes, he agreed simply. They will. They returned to the cabin's warmth, each carrying new certainties in the uncertain night. Whatever Sophia's true purpose, whatever Sherman Harper's reach, they would face it together, healer and healer to be, bound by promises kept and secrets shared. Outside, the aspen trees stood sentinel in the moonlight, their bare branches etching silver networks against the star-filled sky. Patient witnesses to human dramas unfolding beneath their ancient gaze, they held their wisdom close, waiting for spring's revival to share it once more. Morning arrived with renewed snowfall and an unexpected departure. Johnson, declaring his leg much improved, announced his intention to return to the lumber camp. Best get back for the boss docks more'n a week's pay, he explained, though his frequent glances toward Sophia suggested another motivation for his exit. Ethan provided fresh bandages and instructions, knowing the lumberman wouldn't stay regardless. Change the dressing daily, keep it clean, no heavy work for another week at least. Johnson nodded, already pulling on his coat. Appreciate all you've done, Doc. And you too, miss. He hesitated, glancing between Abigail and Sophia. Mrs. Redwood, Abigail supplied smoothly, the false name now a protective cloak. Safe travels, Mr. Johnson. After his departure, Ethan outlined his plan for relocating to the other cabin. We'll leave after midday. The snowfall should cover our tracks. Sophia listened intently, Lily pressed against her side. Is this because of me? Have I brought danger to you? No more than was already approaching, Ethan assured her, his tone neutral. The mountains demand respect for survival, that's all. As they prepared provisions and gathered medical supplies, Maxwell arrived with his wagon, ostensibly to check Johnson's progress. Just missed him, Ethan said, welcoming his friend inside. Stubborn as ever. Maxwell stomped snow from his boots. Aren't we all? His gaze took in the cabin's new occupants, lingering on Sophia with poorly disguised suspicion. Afternoon, ma'am, miss. Lily gave a small curtsy that seemed incongruous with their rustic surroundings. Maxwell's eyebrow rose slightly at the practiced gesture. While Abigail distracted Sophia with packing instructions, Ethan drew Maxwell aside, speaking in low tones. The lumberman nodded gravely, then louder. Happy to escort the ladies, Doc. My wagon's sturdy enough for this weather. Their plan took shape with minimal explanation. Maxwell would transport Abigail, Sophia, and Lily along the safer route to the second cabin, while Ethan took a more exposed path on horseback, creating tracks that would appear to be those of a group rather than an individual. As they loaded the wagon, Abigail noticed Sophia's careful attention to Ethan's route description. The woman's questions seemed innocent enough, concerns about the journey's length, the cabin's provisions, but her eyes cataloged every landmark Ethan mentioned. Wrapped in heavy blankets against the cold, they set off shortly after noon. The forest embraced them in hushed stillness, snow muffling the wagon wheels and the horses' hooves. Sophia kept Lily close, their heads bent together often in whispered conversation too quiet for Abigail to overhear. Maxwell maintained a watchful silence, his experienced hands guiding the horses through the treacherous terrain. Only when they paused at a stream crossing did he speak privately to Abigail. Doc trusts you, he murmured, helping her down from the wagon. Says you've got healing in your hands like your mother did. Abigail glanced at him sharply. You knew my mother? Everybody round these parts knew Eleanor Harper, Maxwell said, checking the horse's harness. Kind woman, helped my wife through a difficult birth before the doc came to these mountains. His voice dropped further. She deserved better than she got. Yes, she did, Abigail agreed softly. Maxwell straightened, his weathered face solemn. Doc's given more to these mountains than they've given back. Remember that when things get hard. Before Abigail could question his cryptic statement, Sophia approached, asking about the remaining distance. The moment for confidence passed. They continued through the deepening afternoon, the forest growing denser, the trail narrower. Snow began falling again, fat flakes that clung to eyelashes and melted on cheeks. The world contracted to white silence, broken only by the creak of the wagon and the occasional call of a winter bird. Finally, as dusk gathered beneath the trees, they reached a small clearing. Unlike Ethan's main cabin, this structure was smaller, partially built into a hillside, with a single window and smoke-blackened chimney. It might have been a miner's dwelling once, repurposed for its current secretive function. Not much to look at, Maxwell acknowledged, helping them down, but solid walls and a good roof. Doc keeps it stocked year-round. Inside the cabin was indeed basic but prepared for occupants. Dry firewood stacked neatly, preserved foods in a small cupboard, clean bedding folded on a narrow cot. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its hearth swept clean and ready for lighting. Doc should arrive within 2 hours, Maxwell said, bringing in their supplies, unless he's making extra tracks to confuse followers. Sophia moved around the small space, her fingers trailing over surfaces, examining everything with careful attention. It's perfect, she said, a true sanctuary. Maxwell gave Abigail a meaningful glance, then announced his departure. Need to get back before full dark. Doc knows how to find you. Left alone with Sophia and Lily, Abigail busied herself lighting the fire and preparing a simple meal from the stores. Lily helped willingly, but Sophia seemed distracted, repeatedly checking the window that faced the approaching trail. Are you worried about Dr. Redwood? Abigail asked, testing her suspicions. What? Oh, yes, of course, Sophia replied, her composure returning. The weather is worsening. He knows these mountains better than anyone, Abigail assured her, watching Sophia's reaction carefully, almost as if he's part of them. You care for him, Sophia observed, shifting the focus. It's evident in your voice. Abigail considered her response, aware they were engaged in a subtle duel of information. He saved me from a fate worse than death. Gratitude comes naturally. Just gratitude? Sophia pressed with a knowing smile. Abigail turned to stir the pot of beans warming over the fire, using the moment to compose her features. De Redwood has never been anything but professional and respectful, unlike most men I've known. Rare qualities indeed, Sophia agreed, moving to help Lily arrange blankets on the cot. Almost too perfect, one might say. The implication hung in the air, that Ethan's decency might be a facade, a manipulation. Abigail felt a flash of defensive anger but contained it. If Sophia sought to sow doubt, showing an emotional reaction would only confirm the woman's suspicions about her feelings for Ethan. No one is perfect, Abigail replied evenly, but some try harder than others to do what's right. The conversation lulled as they ate their simple dinner, Lily's innocent chatter about forest animals providing welcome distraction from the underlying tensions. The child seemed genuinely delighted by their wilderness adventure, her enthusiasm either remarkably genuine or remarkably well performed. Night settled fully outside, the wind rising to whistle through the trees. Still, Ethan did not arrive. Abigail found herself joining Sophia in glancing repeatedly toward the window, though for very different reasons. As Lily finally drifted to sleep, Sophia sat beside Abigail at the fire. May I ask you something personal? She inquired, her voice gentle. Abigail nodded cautiously. If you could confront your father again, tell him exactly how you feel about what he did to your mother, to you, what would you say? The question struck unexpectedly deep. Abigail had imagined such confrontations countless times during sleepless nights in her father's house, but never expected to voice those thoughts. I would tell him, she began slowly, that he never owned me, that whatever power he thought he had was built on fear, not respect, that my mother's death is on his hands, no matter what the town believes. She paused, surprised by her own clarity. And I would tell him that I forgive him, not for his sake, but for mine, because carrying hatred only continues his hold over me. Sophia studied her intently. Remarkable, she murmured. After everything, you can still find forgiveness. Not forgiveness as most understand it, Abigail clarified. I don't absolve him. I simply refuse to let his actions determine my future. And what is that future, Abigail? Sophia asked softly. With Dr. Redwood, learning medicine, or something else entirely? Before Abigail could answer, a sound outside froze them both, footsteps approaching through snow. Sophia moved swiftly to the window, while Abigail reached for the small knife Ethan had insisted she keep on her person. The door opened, bringing a swirl of snowflakes and Ethan's tall figure. He stomped snow from his boots, his face drawn with exhaustion, but alert. You're safe, he said, his eyes finding Abigail first, then checking Sophia and the sleeping Lily. Good. We were getting worried, Sophia said, relief evident in her voice. The storm is worsening. Ethan nodded, removing his snow-covered coat. I took a longer route, made some false trails. His gaze met Abigail's briefly, communicating caution. We should be secure here for now. The cabin seemed to shrink with his presence, his broad shoulders and quiet authority filling the small space. He accepted the coffee Abigail offered, their fingers brushing momentarily during the exchange, a fleeting touch that nonetheless anchored them both in the shared understanding of potential danger. As the fire burned low and conversation dwindled, sleeping arrangements were determined by simple practicality. Sophia and Lily would keep the cot, Abigail would use bedrolls near the fire, and Ethan would take first watch from the single chair positioned to view both the door and window. I'll wake you in 4 hours, he told Abigail quietly as she settled into her blankets. We'll alternate watches until dawn. The arrangement confirmed his continuing suspicion of their guests without voicing it directly. Abigail nodded, grateful for the implicit trust he placed in her vigilance. As the cabin quieted, snow continued falling outside, blanketing the world in pristine white that concealed all traces of their journey. Ethan sat motionless in the chair, his outline sharp against the dying firelight, a sentinel between the sleeping women and whatever dangers might approach through the winter night. Abigail closed her eyes but remained alert, her hand resting near the knife beneath her pillow. In the strange new territory of her life, between captivity and freedom, between fear and security, she found herself becoming someone new, a woman who maintained watches in the darkness, who learned to heal, who dared to imagine futures previously forbidden. The aspen trees outside stood equally vigilant, their pale trunks ghostly in the snowy night, waiting for dawn to reveal what the darkness concealed. Dawn arrived reluctantly, weak sunlight filtering through clouds heavy with snow. Abigail, who had taken the final watch, sat by the window with Ethan's rifle across her lap. She had never fired a weapon before, but his brief instruction during their night exchange of duties had been clear. Aim for the center, breathe out, squeeze gently. She prayed she wouldn't need to test her marksmanship. Ethan stirred from his brief rest on the floor, rising silently to avoid waking Sophia and Lily. He moved to join Abigail at the window, his presence reassuring in the pale morning light. See anything? He murmured. Just snow and trees, she replied softly. And a fox, about an hour ago, red against all that white. Ethan nodded, taking the rifle from her with careful hands. You should rest. I'm not tired, Abigail said, though exhaustion pulled at her limbs. The night watch had provided time to think, to process the revelations of recent days. Ethan, I need to ask you something. His eyes met hers, patient and direct. Ask. Was the inheritance from my mother? Did my father know about it? Ethan's gaze shifted to the sleeping forms of Sophia and Lily, then back to Abigail. Not initially, your mother kept it secret, even from me until near the end. But about a year after her death, a banker from Boston came to inquire about the trust. I believe Sherman learned of it then. And my 25th birthday approaching would mean you'd gain control of those assets, Ethan confirmed, independent of any husband or guardian. Abigail processed this, pieces fitting together with cold clarity. That's why he was so desperate to marry me to Pierce. A husband would legally control my inheritance. Most likely. Ethan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Pierce Montgomery has mining interests bordering your mother's silver claim. Combined, they would be quite valuable. The casual way they had planned her life, her future, treating her as nothing more than a conduit for wealth. The familiar anger rose in Abigail, but differently now. No longer helpless rage, but something more focused, determined. "I won't let them have it," she said quietly. "Not the money, not me." Ethan studied her face, seeing the resolution there. "The legal documents are secure. When the time comes, we can contact your mother's lawyers in Boston. If we survive until then," Abigail added, her gaze returning to the snow-covered landscape outside. Movement from the cot drew their attention. Lily sat up, rubbing sleep from her eyes. The child's hair was tousled, her expression momentarily unguarded, truly childlike, before she noticed them watching. Something shifted in her demeanor then, a subtle straightening, an awareness entering her eyes that seemed too calculated for her years. "Good morning," she said, her voice carefully modulated between childish and proper. "Is there breakfast?" "Good morning, Lily," Abigail replied, moving toward the small stove. "I'll prepare something." As she busied herself with the morning meal, Abigail watched Lily wake her mother with practiced gentleness. Sophia came to consciousness with a startle that suggested habitual vigilance, the response of someone accustomed to danger upon waking. Whether that danger was a violent husband or discovery in her deception, Abigail couldn't determine. They ate a simple breakfast of cornbread and dried apple preserves, conversation minimal and practical. Water needed fetching, firewood required stacking, plans for the day limited by snow and caution. Through it all, Abigail observed the subtle dance of information between Ethan and Sophia, each offering just enough to appear cooperative while revealing nothing of consequence. After the meal, Ethan announced he would check the perimeter and hunting snares. "We need fresh meat if we're to stay here more than a day or two." "I'll accompany you," Sophia offered quickly. "Lily can help Mrs. Redwood with the washing up." A flicker of wariness crossed Ethan's features, quickly masked. "The terrain is difficult." "I'm stronger than I look," Sophia interrupted with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "And I'd value some private conversation, doctor to patient." The implication was clear. She wished to discuss intimate concerns away from her daughter's ears, a reasonable request that would be suspicious to refuse. "Very well," Ethan conceded, reaching for his coat. "But we won't go far." As they prepared to leave, Sophia knelt before Lily, straightening the child's collar with maternal attention that seemed genuine. "Be good for Mrs. Redwood," she instructed. "Remember what we practiced." The peculiar phrasing sent a chill through Abigail. What exactly had they practiced? Once alone with Lily, Abigail maintained a careful cheerfulness as they washed the breakfast dishes. The child worked diligently, her small hands capable and precise. Too precise for most 7-year-olds, Abigail thought. "You're very good at this," she observed. "Did your mother teach you?" Lily nodded without looking up. "Mother says a lady should know how to manage a household, even with servants." "Servants?" Abigail echoed, noting the reference to wealth that contradicted Sophia's story of desperate flight. Lily's hands stilled momentarily, a flash of concern crossing her face before she recovered. "Before father's gambling debts," she explained smoothly, "we had to let them go." The explanation was plausible, yet delivered with practiced ease that raised Abigail's suspicions further. She decided to test the child's story. "It must have been difficult, leaving your home so suddenly. Did you bring any treasures with you? I had a small doll when I was your age that I couldn't bear to part with." Lily hesitated, calculation visible behind her innocent expression. "Mother said we could only bring necessities," she finally answered, the diplomatic evasion worthy of a much older mind. "Of course," Abigail agreed, letting the subject drop. She moved to the window, ostensibly checking the weather, but actually scanning for Ethan and Sophia. They were just visible at the forest's edge, Sophia gesturing emphatically as she spoke. "Mrs. Redwood?" Lily's voice came from directly behind her, startling Abigail with its suddenness. "May I ask you something?" Abigail turned, finding the child unnervingly close. "Of course, Lily. Are you really Dr. Redwood's wife?" The directness of the question momentarily stole Abigail's response. She looked into Lily's clear eyes and saw nothing of childhood innocence, only watchful assessment. "Why would you ask that?" Abigail countered gently. "Because you sleep separately," Lily stated matter-of-factly, "and you never touch each other. Mother and father fought terribly, but they always shared a bed. The observation was disturbingly astute. Abigail chose her words carefully, aware she was being evaluated. Marriage takes many forms, Lily. Dr. Redwood respects my need for space after difficult experiences. With your father? Lily pressed. The one mother says is looking for you? Alarm bells rang in Abigail's mind. How would Lily know Sherman was searching for her unless Sophia had specific knowledge of their situation? Yes, Abigail answered cautiously. My father and I disagreed about my future. Lily nodded as if confirming something to herself. Mother says men like that never stop looking. That's why we must keep moving. Before Abigail could probe further, the cabin door opened, bringing a gust of cold air and Ethan's tall figure. He entered alone, his expression grave. Where's your mother? Abigail asked Lily, dread pooling in her stomach. Checking the last snare, Ethan answered before Lily could respond. She'll join us shortly. His eyes conveyed a different message to Abigail, caution, urgency. Lily skipped to the fire, seemingly unconcerned by her mother's absence. Ethan moved to Abigail's side, speaking low while removing his gloves. We need to leave. Now. What happened? Abigail whispered, her heart accelerating. Sophia Winters isn't who she claims, Ethan replied, his voice barely audible. Her real name is Catherine Bennett. She works for the Pinkerton Agency. Abigail's blood ran cold. Are you certain? She revealed herself when we were alone, thinking I might be persuaded to cooperate. His jaw tightened. She works for your father, Abigail. They're close behind. Abigail glanced at Lily, who was humming softly while warming her hands by the fire. And the child? An actress hired for sympathy, Ethan confirmed grimly. Talented, but not Catherine's daughter. The betrayal stung despite Abigail's suspicions. She had genuinely pitied Sophia, Catherine, believing they shared similar trauma. To learn it was all performance. What's our plan? She asked, forcing herself to focus on their immediate danger. Catherine believes I'm fetching our horses while she prepares you for reunion with your father, Ethan explained quickly. She thinks I've agreed to surrender you for a generous payment and immunity from kidnapping charges. But instead, we're leaving through the back way. Ethan nodded toward a small door partially hidden behind the stacked firewood, an exit Abigail hadn't noticed before. There's a narrow trail that leads down to Silverton Creek. Maxwell is waiting with fresh horses. And Lily, Abigail couldn't help asking, even knowing the child was part of the deception. Ethan's expression softened slightly. Catherine will return for her. The girl is paid well for her role. She's not in danger. Gathering only essential supplies, Ethan's medical bag, food for 2 days, the precious will and locket, they prepared to depart. Abigail knelt before Lily, who watched their hasty preparations with calculating eyes. We need to check something outside, Abigail told her, not bothering with elaborate lies the child would see through. Your mother will return soon. Lily nodded, too accepting of this obvious evasion. I know, she said simply. This is the part where you run and mother chases. The chilling assessment from such young lips confirmed everything. This child was no innocent caught in adult conflicts. She was a willing player in Catherine's scheme. Be safe, Lily, Abigail said anyway, unable to fully harden her heart against a child, no matter how complicit. You won't get far, Lily replied with the calm certainty of someone who had played this game before. They never do. They slipped through the rear exit into blinding whiteness. The trail Ethan mentioned was barely discernible, a slightly less deep depression in the snow, winding between close-growing pines. They moved quickly, Ethan leading, Abigail following in his exact footsteps to minimize their tracks. How far? She gasped as they descended a steep section, her city-bred legs protesting the unfamiliar exertion. Half-mile to the creek, Ethan replied with boots slowing. We need to reach Maxwell before Catherine realizes we've fled. The forest pressed close around them, branches heavy with snow occasionally releasing their burdens in soft plops. Under different circumstances, Abigail might have found the winter landscape beautiful. Now each white expanse represented dangerous exposure, each shadow a potential hiding place for pursuers. They had covered perhaps a quarter mile when a shout echoed through the trees behind them. She's discovered we're gone, Ethan said grimly. Move faster. They abandoned stealth for speed, half running, half sliding down the increasingly steep hillside. Abigail's borrowed boots slipped on hidden ice beneath the snow, sending her crashing to her knees more than once. Ethan helped her up each time, his strong hands steady despite their precarious situation. The terrain grew rockier as they descended, the forest thinning to reveal glimpses of the valley below. Silverton Creek was visible now, a dark ribbon winding through white banks, so close, yet impossibly far with pursuit gaining behind them. Another shout, closer this time, accompanied by a sound that froze Abigail's blood. Men's voices, multiple sets of heavy footsteps. Catherine had brought reinforcements. "They're coming from both sides," Ethan observed tensely, scanning the slopes around them, "trying to funnel us down this central path." "A trap?" Abigail asked, struggling to catch her breath. Ethan nodded grimly. "Maxwell should be just ahead, but we can't lead them straight to him." He made a swift decision, pulling Abigail toward a dense thicket of young pines. "Change of plans. You continue alone to the creek. Follow it downstream until you see 3 large boulders forming a triangle. Maxwell will be waiting there." "What about you?" Alarm sharpened Abigail's voice. "I'll create a diversion. Draw them away." Ethan pressed something cold and heavy into her hand, a small revolver. "Only as a last resort," he instructed. "Aim center mass, just like I showed you." "Ethan, no," Abigail began, but he silenced her with a rare touch, his gloved hand cupping her cheek briefly. "Your mother entrusted you to me," he said, his voice low and intense. "I won't fail her again. Go, Abigail. Live the life Eleanor wanted for you." Before she could protest further, he was moving away, deliberately making noise to attract attention. Abigail hesitated only a moment before forcing herself down the slope, the revolver heavy in her pocket, her heart heavier still in her chest. The descent to the creek seemed endless, each step carrying her further from Ethan and closer to an uncertain escape. Above, she heard shouts and what might have been a gunshot, but forced herself not to turn back. She had to trust Ethan's plan, his knowledge of these mountains, his determination to keep his promise to her mother. When her feet finally crunched on the icy edge of Silverton Creek, Abigail paused only long enough to orient herself. "Downstream," Ethan had said. She moved as quickly as the treacherous footing allowed, following the creek's winding path through the snow-covered valley. The 3-boulder formation appeared just as her strength began to falter. Massive stones arranged in a rough triangle, dusted with snow, but unmistakable. Abigail approached cautiously, scanning for Maxwell or his promised horses. "Miss Harper?" The voice came from behind the largest boulder. Maxwell emerged, leading 2 saddled horses, his weathered face tight with concern. "Where's the doc?" he asked, already knowing something had gone wrong. "Creating a diversion," Abigail explained breathlessly. "Sophia, Catherine, she's a Pinkerton. She brought men." Maxwell cursed quietly, helping Abigail mount one of the horses. "The doc knows these mountains better than any living soul," he assured hearers, though worry lined his face. "He'll find his way to us." "Us?" Abigail questioned, as Maxwell swung into his own saddle. "Ain't leaving you alone," he stated flatly. "Not with Pinkerton's and Sherman Harper's men combing these woods. We'll head for Silverton, lose ourselves in town while we wait for the doc." They rode hard along the creek bank, the horses struggling through snow that sometimes reached their knees. Abigail, who had ridden only side saddle before her escape, clung desperately to the saddle horn, her thighs burning with the effort of staying mounted. Maxwell kept them moving at a punishing pace, periodically checking behind for pursuit. They had covered perhaps 2 miles when he suddenly raised his hand, signaling halt. "Listen," he hissed. Abigail strained her ears, at first hearing nothing but the creek's gurgle and the horses' labored breathing. Then hoofbeats, multiple horses approaching rapidly from behind. "Ride," Maxwell ordered, spurring his horse forward. "Don't stop for nothing." They plunged deeper into the forest, paralleling the creek, branches whipping past, snow spraying from the horses' hooves. Abigail lost all sense of direction, focusing only on staying mounted and keeping Maxwell's broad back in view ahead of her. The hoofbeats grew louder despite their desperate pace. A shout confirmed their pursuers had spotted them. "There, the woman in the blue coat." Maxwell glanced back, his expression hardening as he assessed their dwindling lead. "Fork in the creek coming up," he called to Abigail. "When I signal, you take the right path toward town. Don't look back. Don't slow down." "What about you?" Abigail cried, echoing her earlier question to Ethan. Maxwell's grim smile reminded her of carved stone. "Paying my debts, miss. The doc saved more than my arm that day." Before Abigail could protest, they rounded a bend, and the creek split before them, one branch continuing straight, the other veering right between steep banks. Maxwell raised his arm, pointing emphatically toward the right fork. "Go! Silverton's 3 miles that way. Ask for Widow Carter at the edge of town. She'll help you." With that, he slowed deliberately, turning his horse to face their pursuers while drawing a shotgun from his saddle holster. Abigail hesitated only a second before spurring her horse toward the right fork, the animal responding eagerly to her urgency. Behind her, Maxwell's voice rose in challenge. "That's far enough, boys. Any closer and I start reducing your numbers." A gunshot cracked through the winter air, then another. Abigail didn't look back, couldn't bear to see if Maxwell still stood. The horse carried her around a bend in the creek, the sounds of confrontation fading behind as trees closed between her and whatever fate awaited her unlikely protector. Alone now, Abigail focused solely on reaching Silverton. Her world narrowed to the horse's heaving flanks beneath her, the bite of cold air in her lungs, the endless white landscape flowing past. She had no plan beyond following Maxwell's instructions. Find the Widow Carter, hope for sanctuary, pray that Ethan would somehow find his way to her. The creek banks gradually widened, the water slowing and broadening as the valley opened. In the distance, smoke rose from multiple chimneys. Silverton. The mining town sprawled along the creek, larger than Oak Ridge, its buildings a mix of hasty construction and more permanent structures that spoke of a settlement putting down roots. Abigail slowed her exhausted horse to a walk as they approached the town's edge. She couldn't arrive at a gallop, drawing attention to herself. Better to enter quietly, another traveler seeking shelter from the winter cold. The first buildings were rough miners' cabins, followed by larger establishments, a livery stable, a general store, a two-story hotel that seemed ambitious for the frontier location. People moved along the single main street, bundled against the cold, paying little attention to one more rider. Abigail dismounted stiffly near the livery, her legs nearly buckling after the long ride. The stableman approached, eyeing her horse's lathered flanks with professional disapproval. "Pushed her hard," he observed without greeting. "An urgent journey," Abigail replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Could you tell me where to find the Widow Carter's place?" The man's eyes narrowed slightly, reassessing her. "Business with the widow, have you?" "A mutual friend sent me," Abigail said, hoping this was sufficient explanation. After a moment's consideration, the stableman nodded. "End of Spruce Street, last house before the cemetery. White picket fence, even in winter. Can't miss it." He gestured toward her horse. "Want me to see to your mount?" Abigail hesitated, then nodded. If she needed to flee again, a fresh horse would serve better than her exhausted companion. She paid from the small store of coins Ethan had insisted she carry, then made her way through town, trying to project a confidence she didn't feel. Silverton bustled with midday activity, miners coming off morning shifts, shopkeepers sweeping snow from boardwalks, women carrying baskets of household goods. No one paid particular attention to Abigail in her plain coat and men's boots, but she felt exposed nonetheless, certain that Pinkerton agents might be watching from any window. Spruce Street branched from the main thoroughfare, its homes more established than the temporary structures elsewhere in town. At its end, just as the stableman had described, stood a neat white house with a picket fence enclosing a snow-covered garden. Smoke rose steadily from its chimney, suggesting warmth within. Abigail approached the gate with trepidation, uncertain of her welcome, but desperate for sanctuary. She knocked on the front door, 3 measured raps that nonetheless betrayed her urgency in their spacing. Long moments passed before the door opened to reveal a woman of perhaps 50, her steel-gray hair neatly pinned, her posture straight despite age. Sharp eyes assessed Abigail from a face lined by both laughter and sorrow. "Yes?" she inquired, neither welcoming nor dismissive. "Widow Carter?" Abigail asked. At the woman's nod, she continued, "Maxwell sent me. He said you might help." The name produced an immediate change. The woman's formal reserve softened, and she opened the door wider. "Come in quickly, child. You're half frozen." The interior of the Carter home was modestly comfortable, clean, well-maintained, with simple furnishings arranged for practicality rather than display. A fire burned in the hearth, and the scent of baking bread filled the air. "Maxwell sent you, you say?" Mrs. Carter asked as she took Abigail's coat. "Where is that old bear? Not still in the mountains with this weather coming?" Abigail's expression must have conveyed what she couldn't voice, for Mrs. Carter's face fell. "Oh, I see. Trouble then." "Yes," Abigail confirmed simply. "He stayed behind to delay pursuers. I don't know if—" Her voice broke, exhaustion and emotion finally overwhelming her composure. Mrs. Carter guided her to a chair by the fire. "Sit. Warm yourself. Then we'll talk." She bustled to the kitchen, returning moments later with steaming tea and thick slices of fresh bread slathered with butter and preserves. "Eat first," she instructed. "Fear and cold burn more energy than you'd think." Abigail complied gratefully, the simple food reviving her depleted strength. As she ate, Mrs. Carter sat opposite, patient but alert, occasionally glancing toward the windows as if expecting unwelcome visitors. When Abigail had finished, the older woman leaned forward. "Now, child, tell me what brings Dr. Redwood's people to my door in such a state." Startled, Abigail nearly spilled her tea. "You know Dr. Redwood?" A sad smile touched Mrs. Carter's lips. "He saved my life, in more ways than one. After my Harold died in the mine collapse, I saw little reason to continue." Her fingers absently traced a faint scar on her wrist, a gesture hauntingly familiar from Abigail's observations of Ethan. "The doctor found me, healed me, reminded me that grief isn't the end of all things." The pieces connected in Abigail's mind. Mrs. Carter was one of the women Ethan had helped after his own losses, part of the network of survivors supporting each other. "I'm Abigail Harper," she said simply, trusting this woman who owed Ethan her life. "My father is Sherman Harper of Oak Ridge. He was forcing me to marry Pierce Montgomery." "That snake," Mrs. Carter interjected with sudden venom. "Forgive me. Continue." Abigail related her story concisely. Ethan's intervention at the wedding, their escape, Catherine's betrayal, and the separation that had led her to Silverton alone. She omitted only the details of her inheritance and her mother's connection to Ethan, instinct telling her to keep some cards hidden, even with apparent allies. Mrs. Carter listened intently, her expression darkening at the mention of Pinkerton agents. When Abigail finished, she sat back with a troubled sigh. "You're in a dangerous position, Miss Harper. Your father's influence reaches even here in Silverton through his connection to Montgomery's mining operations." "Do you think Ethan, Dr. Redwood, will find his way here?" Abigail asked, unable to keep the worry from her voice. "If anyone can navigate those mountains in winter, it's him," Mrs. Carter assured her. "But we must prepare for all possibilities. You can't stay here long. It's one of the first places they'll look once they realize Maxwell sent you to town." "Where can I go?" Abigail asked, the brief respite already crumbling beneath continued threat. Mrs. Carter considered, her fingers tapping thoughtfully against her teacup. "The train," she decided finally. "The eastbound passes through tomorrow evening. Last one before the mountain passes grow too treacherous with spring thaws beginning." "To Boston?" Abigail wondered aloud, thinking of her mother's lawyers there. "That would be wisest," Mrs. Carter agreed. "But getting you on that train unnoticed will be the challenge. By now your description has likely circulated to every official in town." She rose, moving to a writing desk in the corner. "I'll send word to others who might help. In the meantime, we need to change your appearance." She assessed Abigail critically. "Your father's men will be looking for a young woman traveling alone. We must ensure you're neither recognizably female nor alone." The rest of the afternoon passed in careful preparation. Mrs. Carter produced men's clothing that had belonged to her late son, trousers, shirts, a sturdy coat less distinctive than Abigail's blue one. With her hair pinned up beneath a cap and her figure disguised by loose garments, Abigail's transformation was remarkable. "You'll pass for a young man at a distance," Mrs. Carter approved. "Keep your head down, speak as little as possible, and most won't look twice." As dusk approached, Miss Carter grew increasingly vigilant, checking windows at the slightest sound. Her tension communicated itself to Abigail, who found herself starting at every creak of the house settling. "I've arranged a place for you tonight," Mrs. Carter finally announced. "The parsonage guest room. Reverend Bill's wife owes me a favor, and they're the last home anyone would search for a fugitive." They waited until full dark before venturing out, Abigail in her male disguise, Mrs. Carter carrying a basket as if simply delivering evening baking to a neighbor. They took a circuitous route through back gardens, avoiding the more populated streets where lamplight would reveal their passing. The parsonage sat beside Silverton's small church, its windows glowing warmly against the night. Mrs. Carter knocked in a specific pattern, 2 quick raps, pause, 3 more. The door opened to reveal a stout woman with kind eyes and a perpetually worried expression. She ushered them inside without a word, leading them to a small but clean bedroom at the rear of the house. "My husband is conducting evening service," she whispered. "He knows nothing of this arrangement. Better for his conscience." "Thank you, Martha," Mrs. Carter said, clasping the woman's plump hand. "Just until tomorrow evening." Mrs. Mills nodded, though her anxious glance at Abigail suggested she found the whole business terribly irregular. "The Lord instructs us to harbor the stranger," she murmured, more to herself than her guests, though perhaps not the fugitive. After establishing plans to meet at the station the following evening and extracting promises that Abigail would remain hidden within the parsonage until then, Mrs. Carter departed, leaving Abigail alone with the nervous Mrs. Mills. "There's water for washing," the minister's wife said, gesturing to a pitcher and basin. "And I'll bring breakfast at dawn before my husband rises." With that, she retreated, the door closing firmly behind her. Alone again, Abigail sank onto the narrow bed. Exhaustion pulled at her limbs, but her mind raced with worry. Where was Ethan now? Had he escaped Catherine's men? Was Maxwell alive or dead because of her? She removed her mother's locket and the will from their secure hiding place in her inner pocket, holding them in her palm like talismans. These tangible connections to Eleanor Harper and the freedom she had wished for her daughter were all that kept Abigail moving forward through uncertainty and fear. "I'm trying, Mother," she whispered to the silver heart. "I'm trying to become the woman you hoped I could be." Sleep eventually claimed her, bringing disjointed dreams. Ethan calling her name through a snowstorm, her father's hands reaching for her throat, her mother writing endless letters that burned before they could be read. Morning arrived with pale light filtering through lace curtains and the promised breakfast tray delivered by a still nervous Mrs. Mills. Abigail ate mechanically, her body demanding sustenance, even as her mind focused on the coming evening's escape attempt. The day passed with excruciating slowness. Confined to the small bedroom to avoid discovery by the Reverend, Abigail occupied herself by reading the Bible left on the nightstand and reviewing her mental inventory of herbs and treatments, knowledge that connected her to Ethan and might serve her in whatever life awaited in the East. As afternoon shadows lengthened, Mrs. Mills brought a bundle containing a different set of men's clothes, shabbier than yesterday's with the distinctive stains and wear of mining work. "Mrs. Carter sent these," she explained in hushed tones. "Said you're to be ready at 6 o'clock precisely. Robert Mason will come for you. He drives the ore wagon that passes the parsonage on its way to the station." Abigail changed into the miner's garb, grimacing at the embedded coal dust and sweat that no amount of washing had fully removed. But the disguise was effective. In the small mirror above the wash basin, a young laborer stared back at her, nondescript and forgettable. 6 o'clock approached with nerve-wracking slowness. Abigail positioned herself at the window, watching for the ore wagon while remaining hidden behind the curtain. The street remained empty save for a few townspeople hurrying home for supper. 6 o'clock came and went. No wagon appeared. By 1:15, Abigail's anxiety had sharpened to dread. Had the plan been discovered? Was Mrs. Carter even now being questioned about her whereabouts? A soft knock at the bedroom door startled her from these dark thoughts. Mrs. Mills entered, her face pale with worry. "Robert's been delayed," she whispered. "There are men searching the businesses near the station. Strangers asking questions. Pinkertons, or her father's men, perhaps both." "What should I do?" Abigail asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Wait," Mrs. Mills replied unhelpfully. "Mrs. Carter says to wait until Robert comes. He'll find a way." Another hour crawled by, darkness falling completely outside. The train would depart at 8 o'clock. Less than an hour remained before Abigail's best chance of escape disappeared down the tracks. When the knock finally came, it wasn't at her door but at the parsonage's front entrance, heavy, authoritative pounding that suggested official business rather than a friendly visit. Mrs. Mills rushed into the bedroom, her face ashen. Men from the sheriff's office, she hissed, asking to search all homes near the church. My husband is letting them in. Abigail's mind raced. The bedroom had no external exit, no hiding place sufficient to evade a thorough search. She was trapped. The window, Mrs. Mills urged, already moving to unlatch it. It's a drop, but not far. Go now before they reach this room. The window swung open to the cold night air. Abigail gathered her small bundle of possessions, secured the locket and will, and climbed awkwardly onto the sill. The ground below was shadowed, its distance impossible to gauge accurately. God be with you, child, Mrs. Mills whispered. Already closing the curtains behind her, Abigail pushed off, falling through darkness for a heart-stopping moment before landing hard on frozen earth. Pain shot through her ankle, not broken, she assessed quickly, but twisted. No time to dwell on it. Male voices echoed from inside the parsonage, moving from room to room in methodical search. Limping slightly, Abigail kept to the shadows, working her way toward the street that would lead to the station. The town was quieter now, most residents at home for evening meals, but occasional figures still moved along the boardwalks. Abigail ducked her head, assuming the hunched posture of a tired laborer heading home after a long shift. The station appeared ahead, a modest building with a covered platform where a few passengers already waited with their luggage. Steam rose from the train sitting at the platform, its engine rumbling in preparation for departure. And between Abigail and that train stood 4 men in dark coats, systematically checking everyone who approached the station. She froze in the shadows of a feed store across the street, assessing her options. There was no way to reach the train without passing those watchers. Even in her disguise, closer inspection would reveal her identity. Quite a predicament, isn't it? The voice behind her, low and cultured, sent ice through Abigail's veins. She turned slowly to find Catherine Bennett, Sophia Winters, standing in the alley entrance, her elegant figure silhouetted against the distant station lights. You led us on quite a chase, Miss Harper, Catherine continued conversationally. Impressive for a sheltered young woman with no wilderness experience. Where is Dr. Redwood? Abigail demanded, her hand sliding into her pocket where Ethan's revolver remained hidden. Catherine's smile was cold. Detained, shall we say. Your father's men are escorting him to Oak Ridge as we speak. He'll face charges of kidnapping, among other creative accusations Sherman has developed. Despair threatened to overwhelm Abigail, but she forced it down. Catherine could be lying. Ethan might have escaped, and even if he hadn't, surrendering now would help no one. What happened to Maxwell, she asked, buying time as she assessed the alley for escape routes. Something like genuine regret crossed Catherine's face. The lumberman was more determined than anticipated. He wounded 2 of our men before they subdued him. Killed him, you mean? Abigail corrected bitterly. Actually, no. Wounded and arrested. Catherine stepped closer. Contrary to what you might believe, Miss Harper, I'm not a murderer. I'm simply doing my job, returning a wayward daughter to her legal guardian. My father has no legal claim on me, Abigail stated firmly. I'm 24 years old, not a child. The law recognizes a father's authority until marriage or the age of majority, which in this territory remains 25 for women. Catherine's recitation was practiced, the argument clearly prepared. Moreover, Dr. Redwood stands accused of using medicinal compounds to influence your judgment. The court will find his actions constituted abduction, not rescue. The train whistle sounded. 15 minutes to departure. Abigail's last chance for freedom, slipping away with each second. Your father is quite eager to see you, Catherine continued, taking another step forward. He's offering a substantial reward for your safe return. Come peacefully, and I'll ensure you're treated with dignity on the journey home. Home, Abigail echoed hollowly. A prison where I was to be sold to the highest bidder. Pierce Montgomery is a wealthy man, Catherine observed. Many women would consider that match fortunate. Then let them marry him, Abigail retorted. Her fingers closed around the revolver in her pocket. She had no intention of shooting Catherine, or anyone, but the weapon might provide momentary advantage for escape. Catherine sighed, clearly tiring of the conversation. Your theatrical resistance grows tedious, Miss Harper. The train departs in minutes. My associates surround the station. Dr. Redwood is captured. There is nowhere left to run. Abigail drew the revolver, holding it with more steadiness than she felt. "Step aside, Miss Bennet." Catherine's eyebrows rose, genuine surprise replacing her practiced confidence. "You would shoot me? I think not." Eleanor Harper's daughter lacks the constitution for violence. The mention of her mother strengthened Abigail's resolve. "You don't know what I'm capable of," she said quietly. "But I'd prefer not to demonstrate. Please step aside." For a tense moment, they faced each other in the alley's shadows. The professional hunter in the desperate quarry, roles momentarily reversed by the equalizing presence of the revolver. Then Catherine did something unexpected. She laughed, a short, genuine sound of amused appreciation. "Well played, Miss Harper. Perhaps there's more of Sherman in you than I recognized." She stepped back, hands raised slightly in mock surrender. "Go ahead, try for the train. My men will catch you before you reach the platform. But I admire your spirit enough to let you make the attempt." The train whistle blew again, 10 minutes to departure. Indecision paralyzed Abigail. Catherine was right. Even with the revolver providing momentary advantage over one pursuer, the men watching the station would intercept her. Yet surrendering meant returning to her father's control, and worse, abandoning Ethan to whatever fate Sherman had arranged. A sudden commotion erupted at the station, shouting, running figures, the distinctive crack of a gunshot. Catherine turned instinctively toward the disturbance, her professional training overriding caution. The moment of distraction was all Abigail needed. She bolted from the alley, not toward the station's main entrance, but toward the rear of the platform where freight was being loaded. Her twisted ankle protested with each step, but adrenaline carried her forward, the cap pulled low over her face, head down like just another laborer hurrying to finish before departure. Behind her, Catherine shouted orders to her men, but the ongoing disturbance at the main entrance divided their attention. Abigail reached the freight area unchallenged, slipping between stacked crates and barrels awaiting loading. The train loomed beside her, passenger cars at the front, freight cars being loaded at the rear. Ticket collectors stationed themselves at each passenger car, checking documentation before allowing boarding. No hope of entry there without attracting notice. 5 minutes to departure. Workers hurried to finish loading freight, their movements becoming less careful as the deadline approached. Abigail watched from shadow, desperate for opportunity. It came in the form of a massive crate marked "Mining Equipment, Handle with Care," being winched into an empty freight car. As the workers struggled with the unwieldy load, Abigail saw her chance. She darted forward, climbing into the freight car while attention focused on guiding the crate safely inside. Once aboard, she pressed herself into the darkest corner behind stacked mailbags and smaller parcels. The workers secured the large crate, then jumped down to retrieve the next items. Abigail held her breath, certain someone would notice the unauthorized addition to the cargo. But the loading continued with the frantic energy of an imminent deadline. More crates, more mailbags, barrels of preserved goods, all arranged with more haste than care as the final whistle approached. A shout from outside sent Abigail's heart racing. "Check every car, the girl might be hiding aboard." Catherine had guessed her strategy. Heavy footsteps moved along the platform, doors sliding open and closed as searchers methodically worked their way toward her hiding place. The final whistle blew. The train jerked slightly as the engine engaged. But the search continued, now just 2 cars away from her position. In desperate inspiration, Abigail reached into her pocket and withdrew her mother's silver locket. With silent apology to Eleanor's memory, she tossed it through the partially open door, hearing it land with a distinctive metallic ping on the wooden platform. Seconds later, a triumphant cry. "Here! Something silver by the livestock car!" The footsteps redirected, moving away from Abigail's hiding place as the train began slowly pulling from the station. The freight car door remained partially open, winter air flowing in as Silverton began sliding past outside. A figure appeared suddenly in the doorway, Catherine Bennet, her composed facade replaced by determined pursuit. Her eyes scanned the shadowy car interior, settling unerringly on Abigail's hiding place. For a suspended moment, their gazes locked across the dimly lit space. The train's speed increased, the platform's edge approaching the open door where Catherine stood balanced between pursuit and safety. Recognition dawned in the detective's eyes, followed by something unexpected. respect. With a slight nod that might have been acknowledgement of worthy opposition, Catherine stepped back onto the platform just as the freight car cleared the station. Abigail remained frozen, hardly daring to believe her escape had succeeded. The train gathered speed, Silverton falling behind, moonlight flashing intermittently through the partially open door as they passed trees and scattered buildings. As the train curved around a bend, Abigail caught a final glimpse of the station platform. Her eyes widened at an unexpected sight. Her brother William, of all people, was restraining two of Catherine's men while speaking urgently to the local sheriff. Even at this distance, she recognized his commanding posture, the Harper family authority he'd inherited from their father. A shocking realization struck her. William was creating a diversion, deliberately drawing attention away from the departing train. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up, their eyes meeting across the growing distance. He gave her the slightest nod before turning back to the sheriff, producing what appeared to be official papers from his coat. The sight left Abigail bewildered. William, who had always been their father's loyal son, the enforcer of Sherman's will, was he actually helping her escape? And if he was here in Silverton, what did that mean for Ethan? Had her brother's unexpected intervention extended to the doctor as well? The train rounded another curve and the station disappeared from view. Abigail was left with questions that had no answers, in a flicker of hope where she'd expected only despair. Only when the town's lights had completely disappeared did Abigail allow herself to release the breath she'd been holding. She was aboard the eastbound train, headed away from Sherman Harper's reach. But at what cost? Her mother's locket sacrificed as distraction. Maxwell injured and arrested. And Ethan? The thought of Ethan in her father's custody sent fresh despair through her. If Catherine spoke truth rather than manipulation, he faced serious charges, kidnapping at minimum, perhaps worse if Sherman's influence corrupted the legal process. A respected physician could be destroyed by such accusations, even if eventually proven false. The train rumbled through the winter night, carrying Abigail toward potential freedom in the east, away from the mountains where she had briefly glimpsed a different life. Safety lay ahead, but at the price of abandoning the man who had risked everything to honor a promise made to her mother. Could she live with that choice? Could Eleanor have wanted this outcome? Her daughter free but Ethan condemned? The freight car swayed, its rhythm matching the turmoil in Abigail's heart, as Silverton and all its dangers receded into the darkness behind. The train continued through the night, carrying Abigail eastward, while her thoughts remained in the mountains behind. She found herself unable to sleep, the decision to leave without knowing Ethan's fate gnawing at her conscience. As dawn broke, the train pulled into a small station. Passengers disembarked for breakfast, but Abigail remained hidden, subsisting on dried jerky she'd found in one of the supply crates. It was during this stop that she overheard two conductors discussing the telegram that had just arrived. "Quite a commotion back in Silverton," one said. "Sheriff arrested by federal marshal for corruption. Something about falsely detaining a doctor." Abigail's heart leapt. Could Ethan have escaped? The journey to Boston took 5 more days. By the time she arrived, her 25th birthday was just 3 weeks away. She made her way directly to the address found in her mother's will, a distinguished law firm on Beacon Street. Mr. Holloway, her mother's attorney, was initially skeptical of the bedraggled young man who appeared in his office. But the will and her knowledge of Eleanor's details soon convinced him. "Your mother was a remarkable woman," he told Abigail after verifying her identity, "and quite foresighted. The silver claim alone has tripled in value since her death." With the legal machinery set in motion, Abigail took a room at a modest boarding house. Each day, she scoured the newspapers for any mention of Montana, of Oak Ridge, of a doctor named Redwood. Nothing came. On the morning of her 25th birthday, Abigail returned to the law firm. The inheritance was now legally hers. No father or husband could claim it. As Mr. Holloway handed her the documents, he also presented a small package. "This arrived yesterday," he explained, "addressed to you in care of this office." With trembling fingers, Abigail unwrapped the parcel. Inside lay her mother's silver locket, the very one she had sacrificed in Silverton, and a single sprig of aspen leaf pressed between paper. No note, no explanation. But Abigail needed none. The message was clear. Ethan was alive, and somewhere in the mountains of Montana, A healing valley awaited her return. That evening, she boarded the westbound train, no longer fleeing but purposefully returning. A physician in training, an heiress in her own right, and a woman determined to build the sanctuary her mother had dreamed of and Ethan had begun. The aspen trees would soon be in full leaf, their whispers carrying promises of renewal across the wilderness. This time, when she arrived, it would be on her own terms.